"You're late," the waitress said, her voice calm but edged with something sharp, like she'd been expecting him. The man paused in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat. "Didn't know there was a schedule," he said quietly, scanning the empty diner. A half-broken jukebox hummed somewhere near the counter, playing a song that sounded older than both of them. "Everyone's got a schedule," she replied, setting down a coffee pot. "Even the ones pretending they don't." He slipped into a booth near the window. The neon sign outside flickered against his reflection, red light flashing across the face of a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. His name was Michael Rowan, a billionaire on paper, a ghost in real life. Deals, flights, mergers, signatures. He was running out of things to buy, and even faster out of reasons to care. The waitress, Grace Turner, according to her faded name tag, walked over with a notepad. "What'll it be?" "Steak," he said. "Medium rare. No sides." Grace raised an eyebrow. That's it. Suit yourself." She turned away, her steps steady but her eyes dim. Michael watched her go, noticing the way she touched the small silver cross on her necklace before disappearing behind the counter. Outside, thunder rolled over Highway 19. Inside, time seemed to stand still. Michael's phone buzzed on the table, messages from his assistant, reminders from his pilot, but he didn't touch it. For once, he just sat. When Grace returned, she set the plate down gently. The steak looked perfect, seared edges, pink center. "You want steak sauce?" she asked. He shook his head. "If it's cooked right, it doesn't need it." A faint smile crossed her face. "You sound like my dad." "Smart man," Michael replied. "Was," she said softly, and that single word lingered between them like a confession. He ate in silence, the kind of silence that carried more weight than noise ever could. When he finished, he folded his napkin neatly beside the plate. Grace approached again, but this time her eyes didn't meet his. She placed a small folded note on the table. "On the house," she said. Michael frowned. "I don't take charity." "It's not charity." Her voice was calm, but her hand trembled slightly. Before he could speak again, she walked away. For a long moment, he just stared at the note. Something about the way she said it. It wasn't kindness. It was something deeper, older, raw. Finally, he opened it. The handwriting was neat but forceful, each letter pressed hard into the paper. "You can't buy silence forever. Some debts collect themselves." Michael's pulse kicked. He looked toward the counter, but Grace was gone. Through the back door, maybe. The diner felt colder, emptier. He folded the note again, slipping it into his jacket. Outside, the rain had turned to a downpour. As his black Mercedes pulled back onto the highway, he caught his own reflection in the rearview mirror. For the first time in years, he didn't see power or control, just a man who finally realized how expensive his peace had become. There, written in small, steady handwriting, were 6 words that froze Michael Rowan in place. "You left before Mama died." He read it twice, then a third time, but the words didn't change. The world outside blurred. The rain, the passing headlights, even the soft hum of the jukebox. He blinked, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Nobody here could have known that story. Nobody. His chest tightened. For a man who'd spent his life reading contracts, negotiating millions, and facing down lawyers, this was the first time words made his hands shake. He looked up. Grace Turner was behind the counter, refilling a trucker's coffee like nothing had happened. But she knew he'd read the note. He could see it in the way her hand lingered a second too long on the cup, the way her eyes flicked toward him, then away. Michael folded the paper carefully, like it might burn him if he wasn't gentle. He slipped it into his jacket pocket, then called out, "Grace, right?" She turned, calm but unreadable. "That's right. Can I get the check?" "It's taken care of," she said, still wiping the counter. "I'd rather pay." "I said it's taken care of." Their eyes met. For a moment, the rest of Harper's diner vanished. The clatter of dishes, the hiss of the coffee machine, the rain against the windows. It was just the two of them. Grace's jaw set. "You finished your steak?" Michael nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time we talk." It wasn't a question. It was an order. He leaned back slightly, confusion tightening his voice. "I don't know what this is about, but you clearly have me mistaken for someone else." A quiet, bitter laugh escaped her. "You think I don't remember your face?" Michael's mouth went dry. "You were younger then," Grace said, stepping closer. "You came to that house on Ridgewood Lane. You talked to my mama in the kitchen. You promised her something." He blinked. Ridgewood Lane. He hadn't heard that name in years. Not since he was in his 20s, when his suits were cheap, his ambition endless, and his conscience small enough to ignore. I don't, he started, but Grace cut him off. You told her she'd be fine, she said, her voice trembling now. You told her your company just needed to restructure, and her job was safe. Michael's breath caught. He looked down at the table. Your last name's Turner, he said slowly. Your mother was Evelyn Turner, she finished for him. That's right. The air in the diner shifted. The rain outside got louder. He remembered her now. Evelyn Turner, the line supervisor at his first manufacturing plant in Baton Rouge. 20 years on the floor, loyal, steady, the kind of worker who believed in promises. He'd told her she was safe, that her dedication mattered. Then the next week, she was gone, laid off with 40 others. Michael rubbed his temples. I didn't know. She died 3 months later, Grace said, her voice cracking but never losing its edge. Heart gave out. Doctor said stress. I was 12. The words landed heavier than any accusation. Michael's mouth opened, then closed again. What could he possibly say? Grace stepped closer, her eyes glistening, but not from tears. You kept building your empire, she said. Buying companies. Buying people. But not peace, huh? That one's still too expensive. Michael looked down at his hands. The same hands that had signed the papers, sealed the deals, ended lives without lifting a weapon. His throat felt dry. I never meant for. You never meant for it, she said bitterly. You just didn't care enough to stop it. The silence stretched long between them. Somewhere in the back, the jukebox clicked and fell silent, as if even it knew better than to interrupt. Finally, Grace set the coffee pot down. You can keep your money, Mr. Rowan. The check's paid. Just not by you. Michael stood slowly, the note still burning in his pocket. He wanted to say something, to apologize, to explain, but the words felt useless, small. Outside, the storm raged on. He walked to his car, each raindrop sounding like a clock ticking down a debt that could never truly be paid. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't have to. Every word landed like a strike to the chest. Michael Rowan's face went pale. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Grace Turner took a slow step back, arms crossed, her expression steady in a way that only years of quiet anger could teach. You walked out of her life like it didn't mean a damn thing, she said. And now you walk in here, order your steak, sit there like the world owes you peace. Tell me something, Mr. Rowan. Do you ever think about the people you stepped on to build your towers and headlines? He looked down, unable to meet her eyes. I didn't. No, she interrupted, sharp but calm. You didn't mean to. That's what men like you always say. The sound of the coffee pot dripping filled the silence that followed. Somewhere, the jukebox skipped, its song fading into static. Michael sat there, shoulders tight, staring at the table as if it might give him a way out. Finally, he whispered, Why now? Why say something after all this time? Grace didn't look away. Because I got tired of pretending I was fine. And because you needed to see what your kind of success costs. The words hit harder than anything she'd said before. They weren't shouted. They were carved, slow, deliberate, final. Behind the anger in her tone, though, there was something else, something wounded. Something he didn't have a name for. He stayed in that booth longer than he should have. Every pair of eyes in Harper's diner felt like they were on him, even though no one had turned their head. The note in his pocket seemed to burn hotter with every breath. Grace stood by the counter, refilling the sugar jar with hands that trembled just enough to betray her calm. Every so often, she glanced back, not with hate, but with restraint. Michael finally stood. Each step toward her felt heavier than the last. Can we talk outside? He asked quietly. She hesitated, then nodded toward the back door near the kitchen. 5 minutes. He stepped out into the alley behind the diner. The rain had slowed to a mist, the air thick with the scent of wet asphalt and old brick. Neon reflections rippled across puddles at his feet. When Grace came out, she leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes steady. So, she said, what is it you want to say, Mr. Rowan? Michael exhaled. I don't know what kind of answer you expect from me. She didn't blink. I expect honesty. He hesitated. I was 23, trying to keep a company alive. Every choice I made back then felt like survival. If I didn't make those cuts, I thought everyone would lose their jobs. I was trying to save what I could. Grace's jaw tightened. You didn't save her. Her voice cracked on that word. and it hit him harder than any lawsuit or scandal ever had. Michael looked down. Your mother, Evelyn, she was one of the best people I ever worked with. I should have done more. I should have called her back. You didn't, Grace said, flat but trembling. He nodded once. No, I didn't. The rain started again, soft, patient, steady. They stood there in silence, the sound of passing cars on Highway 19 humming like a reminder of everything that kept moving even when people didn't. After a long pause, Michael asked quietly, those 6 words in that note, how did you even know I'd be here? Grace shrugged, her arms folded tighter. I didn't. I just knew one day I'd see your face again. You're not exactly invisible, Mr. Rowan. You're in magazines, interviews, on TV. I recognized you the second you walked through that door. So you planned this? He asked. Planned it. She gave a short, humorless laugh. You think I have time to plan revenge dinners? I work 2 jobs, raise a teenage boy, and pray the car starts every morning. I didn't plan a thing. But when you sat in that booth like you owned the air in the room, yeah, I had something to say. Michael let out a long, quiet breath, the kind that carried years of guilt he'd never spoken aloud. You think saying this to me changes anything? Grace met his eyes, her voice steady as stone. No, but it changes me. He froze. There was no venom in her tone, just truth. I'm not asking for money, she said softly. I don't want your foundation check or your apology. I just needed you to see what it looks like when a man's business decisions turn into someone else's childhood. Michael swallowed hard. I didn't mean for it to happen like that. That's the problem, Grace said quietly. People like you never mean to. You just move on, and the rest of us are left to live in the wreckage. The rain deepened. Michael stood there, shoulders soaked, unable to look away. Grace pushed off the wall, walked past him, and back toward the door. Just before stepping inside, she paused. Enjoy your quiet, Mr. Rowan. You paid for it in full. He stayed there long after she was gone, the sound of the diner door closing behind her echoing like a verdict. But you sleep fine at night, don't you? Grace Turner's voice was low, steady, and sharp enough to slice through the sound of rain hitting the pavement. Michael Rowan didn't answer. He just stood there, soaked under the buzzing alley light, the water sliding down his face. Grace took a slow step closer, her expression calm but burning. You want to know something? When I was a kid, I used to pray my mama's boss would see what he did and feel bad about it. I thought maybe that would make it hurt less. She gave a bitter smile. But you never came back. Michael's throat tightened. I didn't think. No, she cut him off. You didn't think. And that's exactly why you're here. Maybe not for dinner. Maybe not by choice. But something put you in that booth tonight. Maybe God finally got tired of letting you hide. Her words hit him harder than any accusation. He didn't have a defense. For once in his life, he had nothing left to say. He just stood there, drenched, hollow, and stripped of the armor he'd spent decades building. Grace turned toward the door, but paused halfway. You ever lose someone and wish you could talk to them one last time? Michael hesitated, his voice faint. Yes. Then maybe you know how it feels, she said softly, without turning around. She pushed open the diner door and disappeared inside, leaving him alone under the misting rain. He stayed there for a long time, watching the water slide down the cracked pavement. For the first time in years, Michael Rowan wasn't thinking about profit margins or public image. He was thinking about regret. When he finally walked back into Harper's Diner, the place felt heavier. The smell of coffee and fried food clung to the air like guilt. His booth was still there, his untouched glass of water sweating onto the table. Grace was behind the counter, pretending to focus on an order pad. When she realized he hadn't left, she walked over slowly, her apron tied loose, her steps quieter now. You're still here, she said. I'm not sure where else to go right now, he admitted. His voice had lost its polished edge. She studied him for a moment, then sighed. You really don't remember me, do you? Michael looked at her, really looked. There was something familiar in her face, something from another lifetime. He shook his head slowly. No, I remember your mother, but you were just a kid. Grace nodded, a faint sadness flickering behind her eyes. 12. I remember you showed up in a black suit with a box of donuts. Said you wanted to talk about the future. Mama thought that meant she was getting promoted. She made coffee, told me to play outside. But I heard everything. Michael closed his eyes. The memory surfaced like a wound reopening. A little girl sitting on the front porch steps, humming softly, holding a doll with one arm missing. He whispered, "You used to wave when I left the factory. Always smiling." Grace's voice hardened. "Yeah, I used to think you were a good man." She took a breath, her tone sharper now. "You walk around with your suits and your planes, acting like life's been fair. But I bet you don't sleep easy. I bet you still hear things. Old voices, regrets you can't drown out." Michael's voice broke. "You're right." That honesty caught her off guard. For the first time that night, he wasn't performing. He looked smaller, almost human. "I spent my whole life trying to prove I wasn't like my father," he said quietly. "He walked out when I was 9, left my mother with nothing. I swore I'd never be that man. But maybe I became something worse." Grace didn't speak for a while. The rain outside softened to a whisper. "Finally," she said. "You think saying that fixes anything?" He shook his head. "No, but maybe it's a start." She studied him again. The billionaire who once ruled rooms now sitting small in a corner booth, eyes down, voice trembling. "You ever go back to Baton Rouge?" she asked. Michael shook his head. "Not once." "You should," she said quietly. "There's a small cemetery behind St. Mary's Church. My mom's buried there." He blinked, caught off guard. "You want me to go there?" Grace shrugged. "Doesn't matter what I want. But maybe she deserves it." He nodded, unable to find words. A bell dinged behind the counter, someone's order ready, but neither of them moved. Grace gripped the edge of the booth, her voice softer now. "I waited years for this moment, to finally say what I said tonight." Michael looked up. Did it help? She thought for a moment, then met his eyes. Maybe not enough. But it's a start too. The rain outside deepened, steady and cold. Grace turned away, back to the counter. Michael sat alone for a while longer, staring at the water glass and the reflection of the woman who'd forced him to face the one thing he could never buy, redemption. Grace Turner stared down at the folded note on the table, the paper soft from years of being handled. "Hearing you say you remember her," she murmured. "I don't know if that makes it better or worse." Michael Rowan swallowed hard. Probably both. The sound of rain against the diner windows filled the silence that stretched between them. Then Grace unfolded the note, smoothing the creases with trembling fingers. "I wrote these 6 words 3 years ago," she said quietly. "I never thought I'd get the chance to hand them to you." Michael looked up, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Why now?" Grace glanced toward the fogged-up glass, where the neon sign flickered in the storm. "Because last week my son asked me what forgiveness really means," she said softly. "And I didn't know how to answer him." Her eyes lifted to meet his. "Maybe this is my way of finding out." The words hung in the air, heavy and alive. Michael could tell this wasn't closure. Not yet. This was the first step into something deeper, something neither of them had been ready for. Grace folded the note again and slipped it back into her apron. Her fingers lingered there for a second before she let go. Michael didn't move. He just watched her like he was seeing her for the first time, not as a waitress, not as a name from an old payroll sheet, but as a living, breathing reminder of the choices that had carved scars across more lives than his own. "Why did you keep that note all this time?" he finally asked. She gave a small shrug. "Because I didn't trust what I'd say if I ever saw you. I figured if I wrote it down, I wouldn't lose my nerve." He nodded slowly. "Smart." Grace smiled faintly, without warmth. "Yeah, well, I had to be. Mama used to say the world doesn't slow down for anybody. You either learn how to fight quiet or you drown." Michael leaned back, running a hand through his rain-soaked hair. She was right. Grace's tone softened, but her eyes didn't. She usually was. Except about people. She trusted too easy. She believed in promises. He didn't reply. He didn't have to. The silence between them said everything. That he was the reason Evelyn Turner's faith had turned into ashes. Grace slid into the booth across from him, folding her hands on the table. "Can I ask you something? No business talk. No speeches. Just the truth." He nodded. "Why her?" she asked, her voice low. Michael's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? When your company was collapsing, you could have let anyone go. There were supervisors, managers, people making triple her pay. But you picked her. Why?" He exhaled slowly, rubbing the edge of his wedding ring with his thumb, a nervous habit from years ago. "I didn't pick her personally," he said. "We were bleeding money. The investors wanted results, something to show the press and the board. I told my executives to make cuts. I didn't even look at the list. I just signed it." Grace's stare hardened. "So you didn't even know?" He shook his head. "Not until later." She leaned forward, her voice trembling but sharp. You know what that sounds like to someone like me? It sounds like you killed part of our life and didn't even bother to see the body. Michael's jaw tightened. He looked away, unable to argue. The comparison was brutal, but true. Grace continued, her voice growing unsteady. Do you know what it's like to watch your mother come home with that look in her eyes? Trying to act strong when you can tell something inside her has already broken? You know what it's like to hear her cry behind a closed door and pretend to be asleep because you don't know how to fix it? He didn't answer. He couldn't. My mom worked herself raw for your company, she said. She believed loyalty meant something. She told me you were a good man, that someday you'd remember the people who helped build your empire when times got better. Grace's throat tightened. But times didn't get better for her. You got richer. We got bills. And one night, she just stopped breathing. Tears glimmered in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She wasn't looking for pity, just the truth to finally be heard. Michael's voice cracked when he finally spoke. Grace, I'm sorry. She let out a short, breathy laugh. Half pain, half disbelief. People always say that when they don't know what else to say, but I don't think you're lying. You look like a man who's been sorry for a long time, just not for the right reasons. That cut deeper than anything she'd said before. He opened his mouth to speak, but found no words waiting. Grace stood up, tightening her apron. You can't change what happened, Mr. Rowan, but you can stop pretending it didn't. Michael looked up at her, eyes hollow, voice low. I don't know how. She paused, her back to him. Then maybe it's time you learned. Outside, thunder rolled low across the Alabama sky. Grace walked toward the counter, her steps slow but certain, while Michael sat motionless in the booth, finally facing a truth he'd avoided for most of his life. Grace Turner paused halfway to the kitchen and turned back toward him. My mom used to keep a photo of the factory crew, she said. You right in the middle, smiling, shaking hands with everyone. She framed it, said you were going to be the man who turned things around. Her voice softened. After she passed, I found that picture under her pillow. She never stopped believing in you. Michael Rowan's chest tightened. She shouldn't have. No, Grace said quietly, but she did. The silence between them stretched, heavy with years of what couldn't be undone. Michael reached into his wallet, pulled out a sleek business card, and slid it across the table. If you ever need anything. Grace cut him off with a small wave of her hand. Don't do that, she said. Don't cheapen it. Money can't fix a broken heart. He froze, the card still between them, realizing how natural that reflex had become, to throw money at things that couldn't be bought back. His hand dropped to his side. Grace gave him one last look. You think you buried the past, but some things don't stay buried. They wait. Then she turned and walked back toward the counter, leaving him in silence. Michael stared at his reflection in the diner window. The man looking back wasn't the billionaire from magazine covers or the keynote speaker from investor conferences. He looked older, smaller, human. The rain outside picked up, streaking down the glass like tears he couldn't shed. When Grace came back from the kitchen, the diner had grown quiet. Only a trucker lingered at the far end, finishing a slice of apple pie, and an older couple shared fries beneath the dim neon light. A country song hummed low from the jukebox in the corner. Michael cleared his throat. Grace, sit down, please. She hesitated, folding her arms. You already heard what I had to say. Please, he said again. There was something in his tone this time. Not pride, not defense, just honesty. Maybe even regret. After a long pause, she pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. He took a breath that trembled slightly. I didn't come here to hurt you again, he said. I need to tell you something I've never told anyone. Grace leaned back, watching him carefully. Go on. Michael stared at his hands. Everything I have, every company, every dollar, was built on the idea that the ends justified the means. I told myself the layoffs, the cuts, the pain were just part of the price of progress. I convinced myself I was saving something bigger. He paused, his voice cracking. But lately, I can't stop thinking about the faces behind those numbers. I thought if I gave enough to charity, if I built a foundation, maybe it would even out. But it doesn't. It never does. Grace said nothing, but her eyes softened, the anger fading into something closer to exhaustion. Michael continued, I didn't come here looking for forgiveness. I came because maybe I needed someone to remind me who I used to be, before I started mistaking success for worth. She tilted her head. And who was that? He gave a small, tired laugh. A scared kid who thought money could fill the holes his father left behind. He looked down. Turns out, all it did was make me hollow. For a while, neither of them spoke. The sound of rain filled the space between words, steady and relentless. Grace finally said, "You can't change what happened. You can't bring her back." "I know," he replied quietly, "but I can stop pretending she didn't matter." Maybe that's a start. She studied him for a long moment, unreadable. "You think saying that's going to help me sleep better at night?" He shook his head. "No, but maybe it'll help me start living like the kind of man Evelyn Turner deserved to work for." Her lips parted slightly, caught off guard by his words. She looked down at the table, tracing a ring of condensation from his untouched glass. "You know what's strange?" she said softly. "I came to work this morning thinking I'd finally get to hurt you. Thought it would feel good, watching you sit here and squirm. But now, looking at you like this," she shook her head, "it doesn't feel good at all." Michael leaned forward, his voice low. "Maybe that's because you're not like me." Grace looked up, eyes narrowing slightly. "You didn't ruin someone else's life to save your own," he said. "You told the truth. That's what strong people do." She gave a small, sad smile. "Strong people still break, Mr. Rowan." He nodded, returning the faintest smile of his own. "Yeah," he said, "but they don't stay broken." The rain outside began to ease, leaving behind the soft hum of the jukebox and the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Grace stood slowly, her eyes lingering on him one last time. Michael watched her walk away, realizing this wasn't redemption, it was recognition. A reckoning long overdue. And for the first time in years, Michael Rowan didn't feel like a billionaire. He just felt human. The rain had slowed to a gentle whisper against the diner's windows, like the world was finally exhaling after holding its breath too long. Grace leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching the man who hadn't moved from his booth in nearly an hour. Michael Rowan sat there with a faraway look, his untouched coffee growing cold. His suit jacket hung loose on his shoulders, rain-speckled, his tie half undone. He looked less like a billionaire now and more like a man trying to remember what forgiveness was supposed to feel like. "Then maybe breaking," he said finally, his voice low, "is the only honest thing either of us has done today." For a moment, neither spoke. The clock above the door ticked quietly, steady and indifferent. "So," Grace said, breaking the silence, "what happens now? You go back to your jet? Your glass offices and meetings?" He thought about it. "Maybe not," he said. "Maybe I start with Baton Rouge. Visit her grave, like you said." Grace blinked, surprised. "You'd really do that?" "Yes," he said simply. "Not because it'll fix anything, but because it's what I should have done a long time ago." She studied him carefully, searching for cracks in his voice, signs of another empty promise. After a moment, she nodded slightly. "If you go there, bring flowers." She liked marigolds. A faint, almost broken smile touched his face. "I remember. She used to keep them by her desk." "Yeah," Grace whispered. Said they reminded her that even hard things can bloom. Her voice faltered. A tear rolled down her cheek, catching the light before falling onto the counter. This time, she didn't wipe it away. "I wish I could tell her daughter turned out like her," Michael said quietly. Grace looked up, startled. His words hit deeper than she wanted to admit. "She's gone," he continued. "But you." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "You've got her strength. You didn't have to talk to me today. You could have just served the coffee and walked away. But you didn't. That's something I can't buy." Grace swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. "You don't owe me words, Mr. Rowan." "I do," he said firmly. "I owe you more than that." The bell above the diner door jingled softly as a trucker left, letting in a cool gust of air. Then the door shut, and silence settled again. Grace set down the rag she'd been holding. "You said you wanted the truth," she said. "So here's mine." Michael looked up. "I hated you for years," she said quietly. "Blamed you for everything that went wrong. But standing here now," she paused, her voice trembling, "I see something I didn't expect." "What's that?" "You're not a monster," she said. "Just a man who forgot what being human meant." The words hit harder than she realized. For the first time since finding Evelyn Turner's note, Michael felt something shift inside him. Not peace, not forgiveness, but the uneasy weight of a second chance. The rain had softened into mist by the time the last customer left. Grace moved slowly behind the counter, her motions thoughtful. Michael stayed seated, his fingers tracing the rim of the coffee cup. He watched her work, realizing how many people like her had moved through his life unnoticed. The janitors who cleaned his offices at night, the security guards who nodded when he passed, the assistants who held his empire together while he barked orders. All of them invisible, all of them human. He rubbed his temples, then spoke. "You've got a son, right?" Grace froze. "Yeah," she said after a moment. "Jake, 16, thinks he's invincible." Michael smiled faintly. "He know about all this?" "Some of it," she said. "Not everything. Just that my mama worked herself to death for a man who didn't care. I didn't tell him your name. Didn't want him hating a ghost." He nodded slowly. "That was kind of you." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "No, that's me trying to protect him from a world that chews up boys like him and spits them out. Anger's a fire, Mr. Rowan. If you don't control it, it controls you." Michael's eyes dropped to the table. "I wish someone had told me that when I was his age." Grace looked at him for a long moment. "What made you like this? All that money, all that power. What did it cost you?" He hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Everything that mattered." Her hand stilled. "My mother worked 3 jobs," he said. "I used to hear her crying at night, over bills, over people who left. I swore I'd never feel that powerless again. Success became my faith. I thought if I climbed high enough, I'd finally be free. But the higher I got, the emptier it felt. I traded people for profit. Then one day I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back." Grace leaned on the counter, her voice soft but steady. "Maybe today's your mirror then." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "You can't change what you did," she said. "But you can change the man who walks out of here." He sat with that for a moment, the sound of rain faintly tapping against the glass. Then he nodded. "You're right." She crossed her arms, skeptical but not unkind. "We'll see." For the first time in years, Michael Rowan didn't look like a man running from his past. He looked like someone finally ready to face it. "And what does that mean?" Grace asked quietly, her arms folded, though her tone had lost its sharp edge. "It means I'm going back," Michael said. "To Baton Rouge. To the old factory. To every place where my choices cost someone their life. I don't care if it makes me look weak. People deserve more than an apology buried inside a charity fund." Grace tilted her head, skeptical but curious. "You think that's going to make it right?" He shook his head slowly. "No, but maybe it'll make it honest." For the first time that night, her eyes softened. The tension in her shoulders eased just a little. "Honest is a good start," she said. "But don't go there to make peace with yourself. Go there to tell the truth about her." Michael nodded. "I will." "Good," she murmured. He rose from the booth, sliding his hands into his coat pockets. The rain above Harper's diner pattered in slow rhythm, steady and calm. He looked around the small place. Cracked vinyl seats, faded photos, the smell of coffee and rain-soaked asphalt. Somehow it all felt sacred. "You ever think about leaving this place?" he asked. Grace smiled faintly, shaking her head. "Every day? But Mama's buried here. Jake's still in school. Some roots you just don't pull up." Michael nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "She'd be proud of you." Grace's lips trembled slightly. "Yeah," she whispered. "I hope so." He took a step toward the door, then stopped, hesitating like something still weighed on his mind. "You said Jake's 16, right?" "Yeah." Michael reached into his pocket, not for one of his corporate cards, but for a small scrap of paper. He wrote down a number in neat block letters and placed it on the counter. "That's my personal line," he said. "If Jake ever needs help getting into college, real help, not handouts, call me. I'll make sure it happens." Grace looked at the paper, suspicion flickering behind her tired eyes. "You trying to buy forgiveness?" He shook his head. "No, just trying to give a kid a chance I never gave his grandmother." She stared at him for a long moment, then finally took the card. "I'll think about it." "That's all I can ask," he said softly. When he pushed the door open, the bell jingled and a cool breeze swept in. The rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, like the world was rinsed of its sins. He walked toward his car, feeling something heavy settle inside him. Not guilt, not even redemption, but accountability. Inside the diner, Grace watched through the window, her reflection overlapping with his shadow in the glass. For a moment, it looked like 2 worlds colliding, one built on power, the other on survival. And yet, for the first time, they seemed to understand each other. As Michael opened his car door, he glanced back once. Grace had turned off the lights, the diner glowing dim behind her. He knew then that his reckoning wasn't over. It was waiting for him in Baton Rouge, where silence had never forgotten his name. 2 weeks later, the morning sun pushed through a pale gray sky over Baton Rouge. The city was quiet, slick with rain from the night before. Michael stood outside St. Mary's Church, behind the small white chapel where the cemetery sat hidden among oak trees. The air smelled of wet earth and flowers. In his hands, he carried marigolds, Evelyn Turner's favorite. He'd come alone. No driver, no assistants, no expensive watch. Just jeans, a black coat, and the kind of humility that had taken a lifetime to find. He walked slowly between the rows of weathered headstones until he found the one he was looking for. Evelyn Turner, 1958 to 2002. She gave more than she had. Michael crouched down, brushing away fallen leaves from the stone. The marigolds trembled in his hands as he set them gently on the grass. For a long while, he said nothing. Then, in a voice rough with regret, he whispered, "Evelyn, you were right about everything." He swallowed hard, his breath uneven. "You believed in people. You believed in me. I didn't deserve it. I told myself what I did was business, but it wasn't. It was fear, pride, greed." The wind shifted, moving softly through the trees. "I made choices that hurt people like you," he went on. "People who worked hard, trusted me to do the right thing. I didn't call you back because I couldn't face what I'd done. And I didn't come to your funeral because I was too much of a coward to see the truth written in stone." He rubbed his face, eyes red. "I can't change it. But I can remember you the way you should have been remembered. Not as a name on a ledger, but as a woman who showed me what a life is really worth." The cemetery was still, except for the sound of birds waking in the distance. Michael stayed kneeling there until his legs ached, until the morning light turned golden through the clouds. When he finally stood, something in him had shifted. Not erased, not absolved, just changed. He turned toward the church doors, the marigolds bright behind him, their color defiant against the gray. For the first time in decades, Michael Rowan didn't feel untouchable. He just felt human. The noise in Michael's head, the endless negotiations, deadlines, the cold hum of ambition, had gone quiet. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about numbers or investors. He was thinking about people, about the faces behind the signatures he'd once treated like statistics. As he turned to leave the small cemetery behind St. Mary's Church, a voice came from behind him. "Didn't think you'd actually show up." He turned and froze. Grace Turner stood a few yards away, a bundle of marigolds clutched in her hands. Her hair was damp from the morning mist, her apron gone, her expression unreadable. "How'd you find me?" he asked softly. "I called the church," she said simply, stepping closer. "Figured if you meant what you said, this is where you'd be." Michael's lips curved into a faint, tired smile. "Guess I'm not as unpredictable as I thought." Grace walked to her mother's grave and knelt beside him. She placed her flowers next to his, arranging them with quiet care. "She'd be glad you came," she murmured. "Mama always believed in forgiveness." Michael's gaze lingered on the name carved into the stone, Evelyn Turner. The letters looked smaller than he remembered. "I don't know if I deserve that," he said. Grace looked at him, her eyes calm but strong. "Forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something you choose, so the hate doesn't eat you alive." He swallowed, the words hitting deeper than she could know. "You think you can do that? Let go." Grace took a long breath, the wind catching her hair. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But seeing you here, remembering her, maybe it's a start." They stood in silence for a long moment. Two people bound not by time, but by consequence. After a while, Grace spoke again. "Jake got accepted into a summer program in Baton Rouge," she said, a hint of pride slipping through her voice. "Computer engineering." Michael's eyebrows lifted, a small smile tugging at his mouth. "That's incredible." "Yeah," she said softly. "He's got a sharp mind. Reminds me of you, except with a conscience." He let out a quiet laugh. "Then he's already 10 times the man I was at 16. Maybe," she said, glancing at him. "Or maybe you've still got a chance to be one." Michael met her gaze, and for the first time in years, he believed it might be true. The wind moved through the trees, brushing against the bright marigolds. Their petals glowed in the morning sun, stubborn and alive. Michael looked down at the flowers, then back at her. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not letting me stay comfortable in my silence." Grace nodded. "Silence costs more than people realize." He smiled faintly. "I think I'm finally learning that." She extended her hand, not in friendship yet, but in truce. A bridge between what was lost and what might still be saved. Michael took it. Her grip was firm, grounded, real. As they walked together toward the parking lot, the gravel crunching beneath their shoes, he felt something stir in his chest. Not relief, not forgiveness, but the fragile beginning of peace. Maybe redemption wasn't a destination after all. Maybe it was something you built, one honest act at a time. Grace stopped beside her car and turned to him. So what now? He looked toward the long road ahead, where the sunlight broke through the clouds. Now, he said quietly, I start telling the truth. About her, about me, about what success really cost. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Good. Just make sure you keep your word this time. He returned the nod with quiet respect. I will. They parted without fanfare, just a shared look that said more than words ever could. Two people forever tied by a single truth. One man's mistake, one woman's courage to face it. As Michael drove away, he caught the sight of the marigolds glowing in his rearview mirror, their golden color bright against the gray stone. And for the first time in decades, Michael Rowan felt human again. Because sometimes it only takes one voice, one act of courage, to remind a man that silence has a price, and accountability is the only path to peace. What we bury doesn't disappear. It waits for truth, for courage, for us to finally listen. No matter how far you climb, remember the people who helped you rise, and the lives your choices touched along the way. Power means nothing if it silences compassion. If this story moves you, take a moment today to reach out to someone you've hurt, someone who once believed in you. Don't wait for time to teach you what regret feels like. Speak. Apologize. Heal. That's where real change begins.